using, there are instructions in the chat box, but you have to use the right click, or to decide to use actually the original language. My name is Mirella Dumafrai. I have the privilege to lead the civil society unit in UNODC, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, which is the office where the World Drug Report is researched, prepared, and published. And I'm very grateful to be here with our expert who will speak, and author of the report, who will speak about the report. Thomas Pitchman will join us in a few minutes. And I'm with Matej, who will be moderating the session. Matej is the chair of the Vienna NGO Committee, as you probably know. And I will let him then to introduce the speaker. About the civil society unit, as you may know, we are the main entry point for civil society engagement within UNODC. And we have been working with the Vienna NGO Committee to facilitate civil society engagement during the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, providing also training preparation workshop to build the capacity of civil society in view of supporting member states in the implementation of their commitment on drugs and crime, and to ensure that their voice is heard at the international fora. This is done through the main umbrella organization encompassing probably the majority of NGOs working on drug-related issues. And we decided since a few years to give one full day to go deeper into the report, which has been already presented on the 26th of June, on the International Day Against Drug, which was presented to member states, including civil society. But here you have really a chance to go deeper, to ask your question to the author of this report. So it's a unique opportunity, and Thomas Pitchman from the UNODC Drug Research section will be happy, I suppose, in presenting you some key findings of this report. And you will hear after that the view also of some civil society experts on the importance of prevention treatment in tackling the World Drug Report, but also a regional perspective on the right to health in the context of drug use. So their insight will also show how the data contained in the World Drug Report can be used by civil society organization. Again, it is really a unique opportunity, and I'm grateful to all of you who joined and the interest shown, because we had over 800 registration, even if now I see we have around 180 online, which is great. And I would not want to take more of the time, which is still precious. So I would hand over the floor to Matej, so that he introduce the scenario for today and moderate this event. Thank you all again for being here, and Matej, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mirella, for a great presentation and introduction of this webinar. I'm really happy that many of us are here from civil society organizations. Some of us were able to attend also special event during the World Drug Day. But in this case, in the case of webinar, we will have some more time to discuss, to ask questions, to receive some more concrete answers from UNODC. And I'm really looking forward to hear first the presentation of Thomas Pitchman from the UNODC Drugs Research section. Not to lose so much time, so Thomas, please, the floor is yours, and we will definitely have some more time after your presentation to discuss and to introduce also to other civil society representatives, which will discuss the importance of the World Drug Report for civil society organizations. Thomas, please, thank you for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thomas, you're muted.
Okay. 1 second.
Already works, Thomas. We can hear you fine.
You can hear me. Perfect. Yeah. Now I hope it works with the document. Do you see the correct, the presentation as such, or not the wrong one?
No, looks great.
Yeah? Okay. So, as usual, we have a couple of the World Drug Report we published this year. We have a couple of booklets. In addition, what we have is the drug market pattern and trends, which is not a booklet itself, but which is online segment of the World Drug Report, and much of the information you find there as well. So I really would invite you specifically to look at this and not only at the booklets, which only have a couple of topics. Now, what are the main findings? One is the drug supply, unfortunately, is rising globally. And we see that the cocaine supply reached a record high in 2022 with more than 2,700 tons of cocaine manufactured. 20% more than a year earlier, and 3 times the amount manufactured in 2013. So cocaine is really, really a problem. Here we speak particularly of Europe. Europe is flooded at the moment with cocaine, but we see it also in all the countries, in the transit countries, but also in emerging markets. Cocaine is there. It's not that much of an increase in North America, but it continues to be a problem there as well. Second, something new, rather new, has been the increase of the market for ketamine. It has existed for a long time, but suddenly we see it increasing in absolute volume, but also in geographic terms. It used to be basically a problem of China. It's now a problem which goes far beyond China. Southeast Asia, but also many European countries are affected by ketamine and a growing problem of ketamine. So we had not been looking for ketamine for many years. Suddenly ketamine is emerging on the market. Another ongoing problem is Captagon and methamphetamine. And what is interesting here is you can see that these markets are a little bit converging. So first of all, there's a new element of the methamphetamine in Afghanistan expanding to Iran. So the production of Afghanistan expanding exports to Iran, and then onwards to Turkey and across to many countries outside the region. But ongoing problem of Captagon. Captagon is basically amphetamine mixed with caffeine, often produced in Syria or in Lebanon, and then exported to Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region, sometimes directly, sometimes also indirectly. Indirectly means they may go to Europe and from Europe back to Saudi Arabia and many of the other countries. So it's really an ongoing issue over here with Captagon. We see globally amphetamine type stimulants at historically high levels. And we see, particularly in a number of emerging markets, we see the growth, not in the established markets. So East and Southeast Asia has been rather stable or declining. The same applies to North America, but in much of the rest, we see an increase. Finally, there's something we have never looked at in the so-called drug cocktails in Africa. And one which really come to our attention has been Kush. You may have heard about this. It's in Western Africa. This is sometimes containing synthetic cannabinoids, but also opioids, cannabis, formalin, other chemicals, and it's used mainly in Sierra Leone, but also in Liberia, Guinea, and it's reported to be smoked, and people very often are reported to get quite violent after its use. so which is an indication of synthetic cannabinoids being used in the substance. But there are also a number of other ones like Karubi in Northern Africa, or Niobe Wonga in South Africa, also called Gata Water or Monkey Trail in East Africa. So again, we are dealing with these issues which normally we have overlooked, but this time we go into this also to be aware that there are very specific, country-specific, region-specific drugs which can create problems. And particularly for all kind of organizations to help people, they must be aware of these substances. We also look this time for one of the first times to synthetic drugs and the distribution. And what we see here, synthetic drugs exist around the world, but they are quite different. When it comes to North America, look for Canada and United States, it's really the pharmaceutical opioids. It is what the problematic here is particularly fentanyl analogs. When it comes to Mexico, it's the methamphetamine. When it comes to East Asia, Southeast Asia, Oceania, it's the methamphetamine, very dominant there. When it comes to Africa, Western Africa, it's tramadol, synthetic opioid. When it comes to Southern Africa, it's methamphetamine, which increasingly plays a role. When it comes to the Near Middle East, as I said before, it's the Captagon, but also it is in Southwest Asia, it's the methamphetamine from Iraq to Iran, to Afghanistan, but also Turkey, neighboring Turkey, also there. In Europe, it traditionally has been the amphetamine, but it's not only the amphetamine. You have pharmaceutical opioids in some of the European countries and a couple of other drugs. Now, when it comes to stimulants, we look particularly stimulants, and then you look, there's quite a divide. You have a lot of stimulants in the Western Hemisphere. It's still cocaine, so the Americas, with the exception of Mexico, where methamphetamine is already more widespread. And then in Western Europe, much of Western Europe is actually cocaine, the most predominant stimulant. When it comes to Eastern Europe, it is still the amphetamine, but in some parts it's the methamphetamine. And when it comes to Southeast Asia, clearly it's the methamphetamine. But also in terms of use, also in terms of prevalence rates, it's in Oceania, as in Australia, it is more already the cocaine than the ATS. But in terms of harm created, far more harm is created by methamphetamine than by cocaine. So we have here a phenomenon in Australia that people use it, try it, but in very small amounts. So you don't find people really ending up in hospitals simply because they take very small amounts of cocaine, because cocaine is so expensive. But they take to a large extent the methamphetamine, and methamphetamine is far cheaper, far more prevalent, and far more problematic. So prevalence is sometimes correlates, but not always correlates with the harm created. The next substance we looked at is the ATS, amphetamine type stimulants. And here we see in North America, it's clearly the methamphetamine number one. In Oceania and much of Asia, it is again the methamphetamine. When it comes to the Near and Middle East, it's the amphetamine, it's the Captagon. To Europe, it's mostly the amphetamine. And then you see in Southern Africa, it is increasingly the methamphetamine as the problem, but also some pharmaceutical. And then you see the large part of Russian Federation and neighboring countries. Here's other stimulants, which means mostly casinones, synthetic casinones, which are the number one problem. And now we see here, we looked at particularly so NPS and ATS, new psychoactive substance, amphetamine substance in Central Asia, Transcaucasia, and Eastern Europe. And what you see for the opiates, yes, it was up and down, but for the NPS and ATS, it's clearly going upwards, one way upwards, upwards, upwards. And here, when we look at the distribution, the distribution is clearly methadone. So synthetic casinones, almost 80% are these methadone type substances found on that market. Methadone, but also other casinones, alpha-PVP, mescasinone, but also you have substances like 4-chloromescasinone and 3-methylcasinone and methylone. MPTV is all casinones. So it's really an area which is dominated by the casinones. So it's quite different from many other parts of the world. Now, the global distribution of seizure cases, as usual, number one has been cannabis. Almost 60% of the world seizure cases are cannabis, by amphetamine type stimulants, 20%. Sorry, somebody can stop the microphone. Somebody is speaking. Then the cocaine 11% and the opiates 7%. For the individual substances, we see at the global level, most is cannabis herb, so marijuana, followed by cannabis resin, 19%. And then on the amphetamine type stimulants is clearly methamphetamine leading. On cocaine is cocaine hydrochloride. For the opioids is heroin. And then we have another substance, the pharmaceutical opioids and the sedatives together, and NPS and hallucinogens accounting for another 3%. If we want to analyze what is synthetic drugs and what is plant-based drugs, we can see the bulk, 73% is still plant-based drugs and 23% are synthetic drugs. But once you eliminate cannabis, you would have already more synthetic drugs-related offenses, arrests, seizure cases than you have plant-based issues. It's just cannabis which makes the big difference. Then we have the long-term trends. The long-term trends, what we see is clear for cannabis. It has been stable, slightly declining, not a big story. For the opiates, for a long time it was increasing, but declining in 2022. And this had to do with the Taliban ban, which was announced in 2022. So even it was only implemented a year later, already in 2022, heroin seizures started to decline. So it's very interesting. Before the ban, before the actual implementation of the ban, you had already declines in seizures. Basically, you had decline in traffickings because drug traffickers held back the stocks, wanted to build up stocks because they want to make more money in the future. So as much as they could hold back stocks of opium, of morphine, and the heroin, they did hold back the stocks, not to sell it immediately, but sell it later, hopefully for them at a higher price. When it comes to cocaine, we have an ongoing increase of the cocaine, at least until 2021. In 2022, it was particularly Europe, with still significantly increases in the seizures of cocaine. But then you have the amphetamine type stimulants, and there you see really the massive increase over the years, even though there has been light stabilization over the last 2 years, 2021, 2022. Having said this, we don't see this reflected in other data. So in terms of treatment cases, there's ongoing increase. In terms of perception of drug use perceptions, it's an ongoing increase. So really, we see ongoing demand for amphetamine type stimulants at the global level. The biggest market, as I said before, it's North America and East and Southeast Asia, but they have been declining in recent years. But the increase has been in other parts of Asia. And if we mean other parts of Asia, it's particularly Southwest Asia and the Near and Middle East. This has been the rising part. Now, here we have the volume of seizures, individual drug seizures in Afghanistan and in neighboring countries. And what you see until December 21, before when the Taliban came to power, and afterwards, Taliban came to power in 2021, afterwards 22, 23, but you don't see much of a change. This is interesting because the Taliban, as you may know, have actually implemented a drug ban, and the drug ban has been really visible on opium. Opium we'll see later, a 95% decline in opium production. But on the amphetamine, methamphetamine, we don't really see it. There probably has been a decline in ephedra-related methamphetamine, and a shift towards pseudoephedrine and ephedrine-related methamphetamine. But we see in the region, in the neighboring countries, ongoing trafficking, so no changes when it comes to methamphetamine, while we see the massive changes when it comes to the opiates. In terms of now drug use at the global level, the best estimate we had was 292 million people having used a drug. So it was 56% of the population. This is actually 20% more than a decade before. However, when you just look at the prevalence rate, it's 8% higher, which means most of the increase was simply an increase in terms of the number of people living on the world, of population growth. So the actual increase has been, fortunately, not that dramatic. When it comes to the substances, number one, as usual, has been the cannabis, then the opioids, then the amphetamines, cocaine, and the ecstasy. We also had a new estimate for the people with drug use disorders. And I just want to alert you, please don't compare this figure with last year's figures in the World Drug Report, because we used another different methodology to arrive at this figure. So we think the methodology now has been improved, but it's not directly comparable. So we also tried to show this directly comparable, and then you see there was a slight increase from 59 million people in 2015, but not any dramatic increase in the problem drug users. When it comes to problem drug use, we have here a distribution about the countries, and the countries tell us, most tell us the problem drug use for them is cannabis, followed by opiates. But when it comes to drug-related deaths, it's clearly opiates. Opioids, and then depending on the source, it's opioids, cocaine, and ATS. And if we have some of the elements of toxicological findings, it was the opioids, followed by sedatives and tranquilizers, then cocaine, and then amphetamine type stimulants. So these are the most problematic ones, drugs in terms of people dying. In terms of people injecting, we had 13.9 million people, so 0.3% of the population, 15 to 68, of which half suffer from hepatitis C, and 1.6 million with HIV, and another 1.4 million have HIV and hepatitis C. And what is just to be noted, I mean, people know it, the risk of acquiring HIV is 14 times higher for those who inject drugs than those who do not inject drugs. So injecting drugs is really problematic. It's really problematic, not just directly, but also for attracting these blood-borne diseases. We have overall a revival of stimulant drugs. We said cocaine, also ecstasy. Ecstasy for a long time, it really has been going down the last few years. Now it's really rebounding. After the COVID-19 pandemic. Overall, we still far more men than women taking drugs, 76% compared to 24%. However, we also see an important growth in synthetic drugs. And this also means actually the gender gap is declining. Now we have it for the different drugs. And what you see here for the classical plant-based drugs, for the opiates, just 16% are women. For cocaine, 24% are women. For cannabis, also 24% are women. But if you come to the synthetic drugs, you see far higher proportions of women. For pharmaceutical opioids, pharmaceutical stimulants, already 41%. Pharmaceutical opioids, 43%, and for non-medical use of sedatives and tranquilizers, 49%. It's almost the same level, women as men. So the more we get to synthetic drugs, the more we get women also involved. So the general trend towards synthetic drugs means also a general trend to a higher proportion of women involved in drug use. We also see some problems with new delivery, which is negatively impacting particularly young people. So here we're thinking of vaping. Vaping, you don't only vape tobacco, they also vape all kinds of other drugs. And we also see young people continue to be strongly affected by drug use. So in most areas, in most regions, you have more of the young people than the general population affected by drug use. Even so, it's not always the case, but at the global level, it's very clear. Young people, 15 to 16 years old, have higher prevalence rates than the general population, 15 to 64. And we see also in terms of people in treatment, it changes from region to region, but in South America, already 49% of the people who are in treatment are below the age of 25. Central America, 37%, in Africa, 31%. This compares like with Western Europe with 14%. So Western Europe, an aging population of drug users, and thus also an aging population in terms of treatment, while in many of the South, countries of the South, you still have a far more younger population being affected by. Now we have also we looked at the most common drugs in drug use in treatment, and there you see also quite a difference. You see very clearly the amphetamine type stimulants. This is East and Southeast Asia and Oceania. This is very clear methamphetamine. When it comes to Saudi Arabia, Iraq, so Saudi Arabia is clearly the Captagon, it's clearly the amphetamine. In Iraq, it's a mixture of Captagon and methamphetamine, where this is clearly number one. And then it comes to Mexico, where methamphetamine is number one. Cannabis, in the meantime, has become, it's not only Africa. Africa was always very, very widespread, but it's also number one in terms of treatment for Canada, and also in parts of Latin America, which before just used to be cocaine. Suddenly you find cannabis as the number one. Cocaine still is clearly number one in many parts of South America, and as well as in Spain. The opioids, traditionally it is Eastern Europe, many parts of Asia used to be opioids, continue to be opioids. Many parts of Europe continue to be opioids, and we see it now also, particularly with the synthetic opioids in the United States. So here, opioids is clearly number one in terms of treatment. For Europe, the cannabis has emerged in recent years. And when it comes to methamphetamine, you still have the Czech Republic, methamphetamine Slovakia, and the amphetamine for Poland. We also look now in total numbers. The picture is slightly different. For Africa, it's clearly number one. It is overall it is cannabis. For the Americas, now as a total, it's already opioids. So even you see there's only one country, United States, but the total number of people being treated is already number one in the Americas. It's the opioids. In Asia, this has also changed. It used to be the opioids. Now it really has been the amphetamine type stimulants where most people are treated, and only second the opioids. For Europe as a whole, it is still the opioids. And for Oceania, it is the amphetamine type stimulants, and then the cannabis. So it's interesting. So from region to region, you have quite some differences. Now, what we also alert in the World Drug Report is the ongoing treatment gap. We have only 1 in 11 people who have drug use disorders actually received drug treatment in 2022. And this was actually a decrease from 2015. So now it doesn't mean that the treatment has declined. It has unfortunately meant that drug use disorders increase stronger than the treatment availability. And this has been a phenomenon, unfortunately, in many, many countries. And next issue, which we wanted to alert, is that women are far more affected than men. Drug-related treatment coverage is far lower amongst women than is amongst men. Only 1 in 18 women with drug use disorders received a treatment globally, while the ratio was 1 in 7 for men. So while men, it's not good, it's very, very poor for women, and definitely more has to be done to enable women with drug use disorders to also get treatment. There's still a lot of barriers for women in many, many countries to get their treatment, what they need. Next issue, access to controlled medicines. Particularly the South Global South is affected by it. With 87% of the world's population do not have access to pharmaceutical opioids, so sufficient access for pharmaceutical opioids for pain relief and care. And we see here just a few number of comparison. We see in the high-income countries, the STDs per capita, so the daily availability per million inhabitants is 17,000. For low and middle income countries, it's 370. So the low and middle income have just 2% of what the high income countries have. And it does not mean that low income countries do not have people don't suffer from pain. It does not mean people don't have cancer in low income countries. Of course they have. And so there's clearly an ongoing problem. The direction actually is going in the right way. So we have some decline in the high income countries and increases in the low and middle income countries. So the direction is good, but we are pretty far, far away from being something which could be considered a normal situation. It is still completely not normal. And now, just for the regions, we see the highest levels is in North America. As I said before, the good news is in North America is declining because it was too high. There was really a diversion from the medical sector. Also for Europe and Oceania, we see some decline. We have seen an increase in the last couple of years in the Near and Middle East, which was fairly positive. We also see in Eastern and Southeastern Europe an increase. We had seen for some time in South America. We don't know why. In 2022, it reversed. It got down again. And for the other regions, it's really extremely, extremely low. Just for you to know, the unweighted average at the global level, 2,800, and you see here the averages for most of the developing countries is very, 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 very low. Now, in terms of the actual numbers in the countries, you see it is high in North America, reasonably high in Europe and in Australia. but in many other parts of the world it is low. So a little bit not as low it is in Iran, not as low it's in Thailand or in Vietnam, but in many other parts of Asia it is clearly below. And also Africa is just South Africa, which is not as bad as the others, but the others is far too low. And we see particularly in Western Africa, big problems, ongoing problems in Western Africa, which also maybe explain why we have such a tramadol problem there, because people don't get the pain medications they need, and so they go to the black market. So they have a black market there, which just wouldn't be necessary if you would have a system in place. Now, I want to recall what the convention says. And the single convention says in the preamble, recognizing that the medical use of narcotic drugs continues to be indispensable for the relief of pain and suffering, and that adequate provision must be made to ensure the availability of narcotic drugs for such purposes. So that's in the preamble. And then we have in Article 9, the board, in cooperation with the government, shall endeavor and blah, 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 and shall it goes to ensure the availability of such substances for medical and scientific purposes. So there's a clear obligations in the conventions to supply countries with sufficient pain medication, and we clearly say that this has not been achieved, that we are far away, even 40, 50, 60 years, we are far away from this objective. And I think it's really also for NGOs to take this up with their governments to say, please, you have signed the conventions, so please also implement the conventions what you have signed. I mentioned already before the contraction of the Afghan opium market, 95% decline in both area of under cultivation and opium production in 2023. So in principle, you would say, fantastic, good news. And they say, okay, maybe not. Why am I saying this? First of all, we see there's reaction. The reaction is very clear. Prices are massively increasing. When there's a drastic reduction of production, you see the price increase. That's fine. That's kind of what you expected. It's just a proof that what we see is kind of reflected in the data. We also see now the seizures. The seizures have been declining. They already started declining in 2022. They continue to decline in 2023, which is very much in line. So eventually this will show up also on the markets, in the consumer markets. So far, we have not seen it in Europe, but it will eventually come up in Europe, maybe later this year, maybe next year. So the exact time and point we don't know, but definitely there will be a decline of the heroin market. Now when you see Afghanistan, Afghanistan supplies many parts of the world, but not the whole world. So everything which is here in this kind of reddish pink is supplied by mainly supplied by Afghanistan. So you see much of Europe, you see South Asia, you see Africa, all of this, but also Canada being largely supplied by Afghanistan. On the other side, you have the Americas, which is basically Mexico, and you have Myanmar supplying the markets in East Asia, Southeast Asia, but also Oceania. So 3 different markets. So when we speak about this contraction of the market, it is really what is in pink, which is particularly affected. Now, what do we see, or what do we expect? There could be a good outcome. The good outcome, potentially good outcome, is that people go into treatment. People go into treatment, including treatment of methadone and buprenorphine. And now let's see where the countries are. So we see in many countries supplied by Afghan opiates, we have quite a consumption of methadone and buprenorphine. So there are systems in place, not in all countries, but in a number of countries. But we give out the warning, please, for countries, make this available also to the NGO community, make sure that this is available for people to access this kind of treatment in a non-bureaucratic way, very fast, very rapidly, because they otherwise might look for other alternatives. So really, the ideal situation, people go into treatment, and if they can't give up drug use altogether, at least they should use methadone or buprenorphine or retarding morphines or any other of these substances. Now, coming to the overall legal market for methadone and buprenorphine, we see over the last 20 years there has been an increase, both methadone and buprenorphine. However, we also see from 2020 to 22 onwards, it has been rather stable. So no more increase there. So if this now develops and people go into treatment very clearly there will be a much more needed methadone and much more need for buprenorphine, because otherwise people will look for other alternatives. Now, what could be the other alternatives? And here we have the distribution of opioid users. And what you see in blue, a type of blue, is the proportion of opiates. So you see in Europe, Western Europe, for instance, still a large proportion of the opioid users use opiates, as it means heroin. The same applies to Eastern and Southeastern Europe. In North America, in contrast, it's to the large part uses synthetic opioids. So so when it comes here for Europe, we very clearly see there could be changes in people could easily shift to other substances, shift to synthetic opioids. So this could be, of course, a problem depending what the opioids are. And now there are opioids which it's the same category of heroin, or perhaps even less problematic. A substance like codeine, fine, it's there, it's an opioid, but definitely not more problematic than heroin. But there are opioids which are really problematic. This is one group is the fentanyls, and the other is an emerging group are the nitazenes. And we have these nitazenes now emerging on the European market already. At the moment, still large, small numbers of nitazenes arriving at the market, but it's coming. So there is a big danger once this heroin drought really is going to develop. Some of the users might go into these nitazenes, and these nitazenes are highly dangerous because they are even more potent than the fentanyls, and fentanyl is far more potent than the heroin. Fentanyl is like 50 times more potent, and the nitazenes are then partly even more potent, stronger than the fentanyls. So something to really watch out. We have seen over the last few years these new emerging types of nitazenes emerging on the market. There was the good news of the fentanyl analogs actually declining. So we think that the measures taken in China seem to have had some success. So we have less of the fentanyl analog being marketed around the world. But the nitazenes is a problem we really have to look out, to watch out of what is happening. Now, I want to, last few slides, I want to go to the dark web. For years, we had seen on the dark web, we had classical markets like Silk Road, we had later Alphabay, we had Dream Market. And when you look at the last few years, it looks smaller. Unfortunately, this is not true. This was not true because it was simply a way of reflection that the markets became much better in protecting themselves in order to be discovered. There is another methodology, so-called by chain analysis, where you analyze not the market itself, but you analyze the flows of the cryptocurrencies. And there you can see over from 2007 onwards, 18 until 2021, there was one market dominating. It was Hydra Market. Hydra Market was basically a Russian-speaking market. It was used but widespread around the world, and very, very strong and widespread on the darknet. Now, what has happened in 2022, the darknet Hydra Market was dismantled. It was dismantled in Germany, but also with the help of the DEA from the US. And you could see the darknet markets really collapsing. But you also could see a couple of months later, it started to recover. So new markets again come and emerge. And we see here, yes, we see the big decline in 2022, but we see again the increase in 23. So there's no end of the darknet market. We just see it continues. In 2022, it was still Hydra Market dominating the market. But when it comes to 2023, we have now Mega Darknet Market, Kraken Market, Blackspot Market, OMG Market, and so on. But we also see that those markets have been not as dominant. In previous year, we had seen one market really dominating 70, 80%, 90% of the whole dark web by one market. Now it's far more spread. What we also see here is that the overall darknet is still more a retail market than a wholesale market. Even so, we also have seen in the last 2 years that the wholesale market sales have increased. So there is a trend towards more wholesale markets, but still there is a retail market ongoing. Why has it behaved like this? For the classic retail market, you have now also the social media which have taken up some of the classical retail market. So the young, really young generation, so to speak, those 15 to 19 are far more on social media, while those a little older, 29, 20, 24, 25 to 30. So this generation, they are very much into the darknet. So there's even a generation gap from dark web to the social media at the moment. But we also see here that the dark web continues to be a problem. What are the good news for many of the darknet markets? They have made actually a ban on fentanyl. So at least fentanyl is not being allowed. But like whenever there is a general rule, there are exceptions. So we had markets like Abacus market, which is actually a small market, but suddenly you found here also advertising and sales of fentanyl analogs on the market. So it's never 100% sure, but some efforts were taken not to have the fentanyls there. We don't have the same for nitazenes. So while there has been clear guidelines not to use, not to sell the fentanyl analogs, we are still missing this for nitazenes. And as I told you before, nitazenes could be potentially very, very problematic. And here I want to stop, and I hope it was of interest to you. And please, if any questions, go ahead.
Thomas, thank you very much for your interesting, extensive presentation. Several of those issues have already been discussed in different thematic discussions. So the situation is getting worse in many areas, and especially in the civil society organizations, we are usually in the front lines of these situations. Thank you very much for these insights, details from the report. And there is already some discussion in the chat. And maybe before we continue with civil society representatives, maybe to address some of these questions. One was not really a question, more as a comment, which is considering how much a dose of synthetic psychedelics differs from plant-based ones. I don't see how it's fair to compare different types of drugs based on weight. Should have changed the scale based on number of doses per sized amount. Maybe any comment about it?
Yeah, just to make clear, you're completely right. If you were to compare weight, it wouldn't make any sense. But we didn't compare weight. We compared the number of seizure cases. A seizure case of amphetamine, a seizure case of heroin, a seizure case of cannabis. Yeah, so we compared the seizure cases, not the weight, and this gave us the numbers. If it were just the weight, we would have a 99% still plant-based drugs, which wouldn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And one very short question: do we have a substitution treatment for ATS or MPS? Do you have any data?
Again, it's a very, very good questions. The answer is, to my knowledge, we don't have it. I know there's a lot of ongoing research. There's research ongoing, particularly on cocaine, where there's to find something, but also for the ATS, there is ongoing research, but I'm not aware of anything where you can say, yes, it is working, yes, it's proven, there's scientific evidence of it, that it works. So I think, unfortunately, we are not yet in that position, but fortunately, we are in the position for the opioids. And fortunately, when there is a decline in opiates, we at least know what we can do. Mm-hmm. And it's one important thing is to know, the other thing is to do it. So please not only know it, what to do, also do it.
Yeah, thank you. You're correct completely. And there is another very good question from Mexico. Throughout the report, it is mentioned that there were changes in the methodology to obtain the estimates presented, but no details of these modifications are offered.
I do hope that we are in the midst of attaching the methodology details to the report. So I think we are not yet finished. So I'm not sure at what exactly the status we are at the moment. The main issue was we had developed a methodology I think was quite useful for problem drug use. And this afterwards, we didn't call it problem drug use, we used it people with drug use disorders, but used the same methodology. Now the problem is that there is the SDGs, and for the SDGs, we have specific indicators, and these indicators are based on drug use disorders, not problem drug use, on drug use disorders. Yeah, and combined with and we are publishing those. But then now we have to be in line, so we cannot have one indicator and then another set of indicator, which is not in parallel. So therefore, the decision was taken. We shifted to the same indicator for the SDGs as we do it over here, and basically that's the underlying story. So really, these shifts, but it will be explained in more detail later on. And I know this is an issue, and I know my colleagues are working on it. Unfortunately, now it's summertime, and we didn't want to delay the report just to have in detailed the methodology being set out.
Yeah, thank you. So, will there be also a methodological annex to the report available?
What we do plan is for the individual, as in the online segment, in the individual graphs to show and explain how it is and how they change from previous years. But as far, and I don't know at the moment how far we are. Some of it may have been done, some of it may not have been done. We are still in the midst of processing of doing it, and so at least in a few weeks' times, we hope it will be ready, and then it can be reconsulted.
Good, thank you. That's excellent. So there will be some more information about methodology available. Okay, before we proceed, I will just take one more question. Is there any data about other drugs, such as animal tranquilizers, being added to existing drugs, such as fentanyl?
Yeah.
There are several named there.
No, just we put it the other way around. What we are seeing, fentanyls are being used, particularly in North America. Fentanyls are being used with many drugs. So many drugs are being adulterated, you can say, with fentanyls. You see it with the heroin, it started there. You see it with cocaine. You see it with methamphetamine. You see it with the benzodiazepines, and you see it with the sedatives and tranquilizers. So it's the whole range gets fentanyl inside, and this makes it so dangerous. So we have some interesting statistics. We also ask of how many people use a drug and how many people die from a drug. And then when you look at the fentanyls, there are more people dying from fentanyls than using fentanyls. It's not possible. It's only possible because people are not aware that they are using fentanyls. They may use all kind of other drugs and are not aware that in reality they use also fentanyls. And I think that's the real big problem. Many people in this case don't know what they are using, and this makes it so dangerous. Second point, of course, is here, the people who operate here are not medical doctors. They are not pharmacists. They're people in the black market, and they add a little bit like this. Normally, for drugs, yeah, a little higher, a little less, it's not a problem. In the case of fentanyl or nitazenes, this can be deadly. Not it can be deadly, it is deadly. So, and therefore, we are really warning about these fentanyls, but also about the nitazenes, because small changes are deadly for the users.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you can still stay with us until the end of the webinar, because
great pleasure.
Keep coming. So there will be some more discussions about several topics presented in the report. So we will proceed with our civil society representatives, because as you know, the special focus of this year's annual report was a framework for health. So we asked our dear colleague Gana Dobak from Eurasian Harm Reduction Organization to present some thoughts and some information from especially related to people who use drugs and the framework for health. So Gana, are you with us?
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. Could you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. So the floor is yours. Do you have a presentation?
No, I don't have the presentation, unfortunately, because that's really very busy times in the AIDS 2024, and we are here speaking about decriminalization, drug policy, and health. I just have several key points. which is rather obvious coming from the report. One important point is coming that the report highlighting the concern about raised NPS in our region, in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, as well as in other regions, and connecting it to the growing HIV and hepatitis C epidemic among people who use drugs. And we are also sharing these concerns and sharing this worrying, as our presenter said. But in the same time, we are connecting it with the right to health. And that's important, that the recent report of the Special Rapporteur on the right to health highlighting necessity of harm reduction and the activities which will prevent overdoses, which will prevent deaths, and which will provide the health services for people who use drugs, and especially community-led harm reduction as a activity which key for the response on the health and for comprehensive response to the health. Sadly, I will say a bit about my region. Sadly, that in a country which contribute the most to HIV new cases and to hepatitis new cases, specifically among people who use drugs, harm reduction and opioid agonist treatment is banned. It's this country is Russia, and we are concerned that the policy of this country and this policy to ban opioid agonist treatment and harm reduction and health services, as well as the effective treatment services in the countries around in the Eastern Europe and Central Asia could continue. For the recommended by the Special Rapporteur on right to health and by all our experts in health, for the recommended response to the drug problem, it's always, of course, the prevention is very important, but in the same time, the overdose prevention, the drug checking for users to know what they're using, harm reduction for new psychoactive substances, safe consumption rooms, legal and paralegal support to mitigate damage of criminalization of drug use and possession, mitigation of this damage for lives of people and their families, support to women using drugs in sexual and reproductive health rights, providing support in case of gender-based violence. Mental health care is becoming more and more important for people who use drugs and for their families. And it's not, I'm not saying that like mental health is the key global health problem over everywhere nowadays, and especially for our region where the war is going on. That's one of the priority. And I need to highlight the same issue, Matti, which you said, that civil societies are the key in the regional response, and specifically in health response, broader, not only like we could not say that civil society working only in prevention or only in harm reduction. Actually, a comprehensive response to drug problems in the countries only possible because of civil society. We are finding money to make prevention. We are finding money to make comprehensive harm reduction with all this fulfilling the health needs and social needs of people. We are finding money to make evidence-based addiction treatment and rehab. And that's the very important part of the story, which would be very good to reflect in the report and to make it possible to show to all the stakeholders and states that this part of the response is very important. And one very short message from Eastern Europe and Central Asia region, because of the recent development laws on foreign agent law and other LGBT and like we are calling them homophobic laws, and more criminalization of sex work, LGBT and drug use and possession. We now facing criminalization of activism and community advocacy and human rights protection. And it could be this in Georgia and Kyrgyzstan and other countries, it could be such a big danger for any services, any community-based services, peer-led services, this comprehensive services I was talking, to ensure health of people who use drugs. that you couldn't imagine. So this organization have only 3 strategies: run, hide, and fight. And the fight is not possible because they will be arrested or threatened to death. And it means that in the whole region, we could have even more health problems than highlighted in the report. Thank you. I guess it's all from me.
Thank you, Gana, for your valuable contribution. As you know, that we do a lot to build regional civil society infrastructures a lot in different continents, just because we think that we have to be connected around the whole continuum of care, because we are actually addressing this issue from different perspectives as a civil society, and we should be more connected to each other, not isolated in different areas, but taking this continuum of care as a baseline for our future developments and interventions. So yeah, that's why one of the priority of the Vienna NGOC, not just board, but also our membership, is to build these regional infrastructures to connect different areas, different NGOs together and address those worrying emerging trends as effective as possible. So thank you very much and enjoy the AIDS conference. So thank you, and hope you can stay with us for until the end of the webinar. And okay, let's proceed with the second civil society speaker. And thank you, Connor, for accepting this invitation to speak from a little bit different perspective about using DALYs to represent the drug attributable burden of disease. So this is also a kind of methodological question, and I'm really interested to hear how do you think civil society organizations can contribute, because those kind of discussions have been running around with UNODC for some time, how civil society organizations could better contribute to data collection, data analysis, and so on, because we know that we have a lot of good and quality data available. And maybe we can hear some of these solutions or ideas from you, Connor. So thank you very much again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Connor Cabesi, and I'm a policy analyst with the US-based Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions and its sister organization, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. I'm also a Master's of Public Health student at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. So alongside 2 professors at school, I recently co-authored an article in JAMA that called on the drug policy field to adopt more comprehensive metrics, namely the disability adjusted life year, which is often abbreviated as the DALY. And then I believe I was invited today to elaborate on this proposal. So first, I'll start with a brief history of the DALY metric. Though it's still relatively underutilized by the drug policy field, it gained prominence in the World Bank's 1993 World Development Report, and has also been embraced by the World Drug Report. The DALY appears to have been referenced in every World Drug Report since 2014, and the estimates in the World Drug Report are derived from the Global Burden of Disease study, which measures hundreds of health outcomes throughout the world. Additionally, a 2016 article on Health Affairs noted that 37 countries have undertaken their own burden of disease studies, which provide a deeper level of analysis and also allows them to adjust variables to review what they would like. The study taken by Australia is referenced later as an example. So what is a DALY? It's an approximation for the loss of 1 year of healthy life, and it has 2 components which are summed together. The first is for the years of healthy life lost due to disability, which represents non-fatal health loss. To calculate this, it relies on a disability weight that ranges from 1 to 0, with 0 representing perfect health and 1 representing death. For reference, opioid use disorder was given a disability weight of 0.697, amphetamine use disorder was 0.486, cocaine use disorder was 0.479, and cannabis use disorder was 0.266. There's also variations for the severity of conditions. So a severe alcohol use disorder is 0.570, while a mild alcohol use disorder is 0.235. This should make intuitive sense because not all substance use disorders are equally disabling for the individual. And then the disability weight is then multiplied by the prevalence of the condition to calculate the YLD side of the equation. The other half is for the years of life lost due to premature death, which is compared against life expectancy. So if, as an example, if your age cohort would have otherwise lived until age 92, but you died from an overdose or any other condition at age 30, for example, you'd subtract that, then you would have lost 62 years of potential life. Put together as the final metric, DALYs are generally used to quantify the concept of the burden of disease, which is also called the burden of harm. So the main benefit of the DALY metric is that it adjusts different health outcomes into a standardized and comparable metric. For example, you can compare the burden of opioid use disorder to drug attributable HIV, as well as conditions in other fields like malaria, breast cancer, COVID, and so on. In effect, it puts the drug crisis into perspective. This is especially helpful for illustrating the burden of the drug crisis, given that many people who overdose are relatively young. As an example, in the United States in 2019, prior to COVID, drug use disorders were the 11th leading cause of death, but in terms of health loss, they were the second leading cause of lost DALYs. This is because other conditions that account for more deaths, such as strokes and Alzheimer's, disproportionately affect older individuals who, just as a course of their life, have fewer life years left to lose from a death. Then one other interesting point that I found is that between 2017 and 2018 in the United States, when overdose deaths declined for the first time in nearly 30 years, the number of drug attributable DALYs nevertheless continued to increase because there's still non-fatal health loss from other conditions and other harms. Then it's also theoretically possible for overdose deaths to increase even as the total drug attributable burden decreases. So quickly, here are some examples of how DALYs have been incorporated into the World Drug Report in recent years. The 2023 version on the left has different drug attributable conditions stacked together over time. The Global Burden of Disease study, which is what it's based on, goes back to 1990. This references through 2019. Then after the 2024 report came out, the GBD study released estimates for 2020 and 2021. Then on the right side, the 2022 version of the World Drug Report shows that 12.9 million healthy life years were lost due to opioid use disorder. The reports, of course, elaborate on these topics in more detail. So based on the latest 2021 estimates from the Global Burden of Disease study, this is their estimate of the global drug crisis. Just as a note, the estimates come with decimals, but I rounded everything to whole numbers for simplicity. For the YLD side of it, so non-fatal health loss, opioid, amphetamine, and cannabis use disorders were the top three. Some may be surprised that the non-fatal health loss of cannabis was greater than cocaine, but that's because the prevalence of cannabis use disorder is significantly higher than the prevalence of cocaine use disorder, even though cannabis use disorder has a lower disability weight. Next, on the YLL side, for premature mortality, it's also somewhat counterintuitive. Opioid use disorder is number one, which might not surprise many people, but hepatitis C and HIV were the next two. Then those are attributable to unsafe injecting practices. For DALYs, like the prior section, opioid use disorder, HIV, and hepatitis C were again the top three globally. Then an earlier slide mentioned that some countries have undertaken their own studies. Here's a snippet from Australia's. And then their latest version for the risk factors only went through 2018. For drug use, they looked at the harms of opioids, cocaine, amphetamines, cannabis, other drugs, and then a separate category for unsafe injecting practices. They also have breakdowns for age, gender, and socioeconomic status. I don't have time to go over all of it, but here's a summary for cannabis. In 2018, cannabis was attributable for approximately 15,000 DALYs. The harms they measured were cannabis use disorders, schizophrenia, anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, poisoning, and then 2 types of traffic fatalities. The Global Burden of Disease study doesn't account for traffic fatalities due to impaired driving. So that's one example of how separate estimates can afford countries more flexibility in what can be measured. And as a related point, Australia's national drug strategy then adopted as an overarching goal a reduction in the burden of disease attributable to drugs, which then connects back to their own burden of disease study. There are a few implications of adopting the DALI metric compared to traditional metrics like overdose deaths or the prevalence of substance use disorder. Given that it adjusts for the age at the time of death, interventions can be targeted to younger individuals. This should make sense, and most prevention campaigns like Indeed already target youth, so that's not a major change. Next, given that it adjusts for the severity of conditions, the conditions that are more severe should be targeted in order to maximize health gains. This also often already takes place with nations prioritizing the treatment of opioid use disorder, which has a higher relative disability weight. Policymakers also need to look beyond overdoses and substance use disorder to account for other drug attributable conditions. Two of the leading ones would then be HIV and hepatitis C. Then just as an example of how they should build on that, the US National Drug Control Strategy from the Biden-Harris administration adopted a goal for reducing the number of overdose deaths and then the prevalence of opioid, cocaine, and methamphetamine use disorder. Those are the only health-related goals that are a part of it, which then overlooks many other conditions such as hepatitis C, cannabis use disorder, hallucinogen use disorder, and so on. So to bend the curve of the drug crisis and reduce the drug attributable burden of harm, policymakers need to invest in evidence-based prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and recovery services, which will reduce both the number of people who use drugs and the harm to them. They also need to consider the risk factors for drug use, and then these interventions will help to reduce the initiation of drug use, and then for people who currently use drugs, it can help them to discontinue that or use more safely. Then lastly, if anyone in the audience wants to review the GBD estimates for their own country or globally, it also has gender breakdowns by age and other categories. They can either go to this link or just generally Google the Global Burden of Disease Study. I enjoyed playing around with it when I first learned about it, and then that sort of gave me the idea for the JAMA article. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, feel free to reach out to me by email. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Connor, for your interesting presentation. Maybe also interesting for Thomas and the team from UNODC Drugs Research section. So let's continue with some questions, or maybe Thomas, do you have anything to add? Any feedback from those two presentations? Any important points you would like to discuss?
If you allow me, do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah. If you allow me, there is a colleague of mine, Kamran Nias, also here in the audience, and he's the person who was dealing with these issues, and I would say he would be the right person to answer these questions because it was his topic.
Okay. Kamran, are you with us?
Hi, yes, I am. I'm along. I don't know. It seems that my video, I don't know if my video is working or not, but yes, I'm around. Yeah, I mean, it was an important presentation on the DALIs, and it's an important piece of work to understand the relative harm of a substance. Unfortunately, one of the bases for to work out the DALIs is the availability of data from countries that would help people estimate the years of healthy years of life lost due to disability caused by a substance or premature death. And I think that's where it kind of like falls short because there is not that kind of data available from all the countries. And therefore, the colleagues from the Institute of Health Metrics rely more on modeling and looking at, and putting in disease attributable factors to calculate those. But nevertheless, given all the shortcomings, it's a very important tool. And as Connor was saying, it's a good way to look at the extent of extent of the harm caused by a substance and what need to be done. Unfortunately, a lot of people also use this the dailies to show that cannabis, the regular or harmful use of cannabis is not as bad as alcohol, because the dailies do not factor in some of the new information coming on the attributable factors to harmful use of cannabis. But having said that, yeah, it's a good tool to use. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cameron. Also, because it's really connected with the last presentation, there is one question in the chat, and it is as follows. I'm puzzled by the high dailies of cannabis use disorder, given that there is no overdose potential. Could you explain the methodology? Could it, just a moment, could it, if cannabis is detected in overdose, then it is included in the overdose data?
So I'm not sure how Australia specifically calculated that, but it would be possible to, like, it might be linked to poison control data or non-fatal emergency department visits, or just the dependence aspect of it. So even though they're not suffering a fatal overdose, there is still the loss of harm from the health condition of that. So I think it's like that.
Okay, thank you. Let's then continue with some other questions which is coming in the chat all the time. So I hope we have enough time to address all of them. One is already from the previous section after during the Thomas presentation. It's related to the thematic chapter on the right to health in drug use. There seemed to be a large discrepancy between the UNODC's analysis and that of UN human rights entities. And what will the UNODC do to better align its World Drug reports with the recommendations of the UN human rights system? So Thomas, this is probably for you.
Sorry, again, it will be a question on Cameron because he was working on that chapter, so he has more of the background here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. There is no straight answer to the question that has been raised. I guess I would invite all the participants and colleagues in this, colleagues from the civil society, to read the chapter on right to health with lots of care and details. One thing for sure, which is evident, is that the chapter does not use the same kind of terminology and that the UN High Commission for Human Rights Special Rapporteur might have used in the report, but in the very essence of the issues of right to health based on the international covenant and the various issues that arise from that very basic right to health are very much included in the chapter. As such, again, as I say, people may not have found the same kind of terminology or the terminology that they may want to see. But unfortunately, I mean, that was not the case, I would say. But in the very content and the essence, I don't see any digression from the Special Rapporteur's report and the Right to Health chapter. And I would invite you all to read the chapter and make an informed decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cameron. Next question is, thank you for this informative presentation. you noted that people are using less cocaine than methamphetamine due to cocaine's higher price, with concurrently less harm. Without doubting your findings, I note that high prices are a double-edged sword. They often are associated with economic degradation of compulsive users, with all types of life destabilization and the harms that come from those. For example, a compulsive user may be driven by financial cost of drugs to engage in property crime or sex work or selling drugs illicitly. Financial degradation can lead to chaotic or difficult lifestyles with less bandwidth for maintaining life responsibilities or needs, including taking the steps needed to avoid harms associated with drug use. So we recommend that this side of the price quotation be subject of future research and analysis.
Okay. Here, I would like to react. It was now specifically to a situation in Australia. And in Australia, we have a situation where, fortunately, we don't have a really strongly established cocaine market, a strongly established base of problematic cocaine users. What we have in Australia are people who go to parties and have a sniff once in a year, and that's it. These are the cocaine users. So, and of course, that's not the crack cocaine users which you find in the United States and some other parts of Europe also, which is really very problematic. So the compulsory user doesn't exist, and partly it doesn't exist because prices were so high. It was not possible for him to develop this disease, this addiction. At the same time, there was the alternative, and this was methamphetamine in the country. So we have these compulsory users in Australia, but they are the methamphetamine users. They are very, very small numbers of compulsive cocaine users. And I think here the high cocaine prices clearly help to prevent this. On the other hand, of course, we know that the high prices are also an invitation to drug traffickers to try to get into Australia, because they know if they get into Australia, they can make big business. And so you have a situation where normally drugs at the cocaine is shipped from the Andean countries to the United States. That's normally the end user market. In this specific case, you have people who ship the cocaine from the Andean countries to the United States and from the United States into Australia. So far, far further away, simply because the prices in Australia are far higher than in the United States. And you can make money simply by making this kind of shipments. And then, of course, we also see now more island countries being affected, because you use also small island countries as transit locations. So I'm not saying that high prices are not a problem. I'm just saying in general, still, they help, fortunately, to prevent an epidemic to develop. And this is what happens in Australia. They are very high, and so far they have prevented a large-scale epidemic to develop, while Australia as such has lots of drug consumption. It's not a country where say, drug consumption doesn't exist. It's a very high drug consumption, but not with regard to cocaine. But having said this, you have the situation that there are more people having used cocaine in the last year than there are people having used methamphetamine in the last year. So there's this discrepancy. Therefore, I'm saying the problem really there is the methamphetamine. And fortunately, the cocaine so far has not been the problem, but it has not been the problem, not because Australians would not like cocaine. No, they also would. You have seen in the UK, once the prices of cocaine collapsed, people were moving from the amphetamine to cocaine. So there's not people just love synthetic drugs and wouldn't go to plant-based drugs. That's just not the case. But in Australia, prices really have been kept high, and this has prevented so far a cocaine epidemic from developing.
Thank you very much. I know that this issue has been discussed with your section already for some time, for several times, but still I think it's valuable to address it here at the webinar as well, because some webinar participants are quite critical because the World Drug Report focuses mostly on substances and supply reduction indicators. And especially civil society organizations could provide a good analysis, especially in the field of prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and recovery. So there should be a bit more indicators and analysis in these fields to balance a little bit the report from the supply reduction side and the focusing on substances predominantly. So do you have any comments or any plans in your section to improve the report and include
I think
more
again, this
civil
was
society data?
for Kamran to respond.
Good. Kamran, please. Thank you.
Okay, Thomas. Yeah, okay, thank you. I mean, yeah, I think there is again a bit of a misunderstanding here. What we present in the UNODC is not only based on the officially reported data from the countries, the member states, as reported in the annual reports questionnaire. And whatever we present, we try to supplement that information from the from other national reports or nationally available reports. We also supplement the information from published literature. And sometimes, as you would see in the chapter on synthetic drugs and gender, we even did a whole set of qualitative interviews across 7 countries with 90 key informants to get the information and present it as what are the gender differences in the use and harmful use of various synthetic drugs. And so if there are valid reports, studies, information that is produced by the civil society organizations, we would be more than willing to use that information to supplement the information we would have. There is no bar to it, actually, but somehow this perception has persisted that the World Drug Report is only based on official data. It is not, and therefore I really want you to read the thematic chapters on drugs and synthetic drugs, the right to health, the policy changes around cannabis use and psychedelics, and all the other thematic chapters, and you will see that they are not entirely based on officially reported data. And again, to repeat myself, if there is good, valid information report that is produced by a civil society organization, and if it's shared with us, and if it's relevant to the analysis that we are doing, there's no bar in us not using that information. I hope that clarifies. Thank you.
You're muted now.
In
Sorry.
the near future. Yes, and we will also try to promote this among civil society organizations to provide this data and studies and valuable information which could be used then in the World Drug Report. And we understand that there is no barrier, but the quality is usually in question. So we try to promote this among our membership and other civil society organizations to provide more quality data for your section and the World Drug Report. So we are coming to the end of this webinar. So maybe if there are 2 hands, so I will also give an opportunity to Milutin. Milutin, you're first to raise the hand. But if you have any very short question or remark, please, Milutin.
Thank you, Matej. I just wanted to add that my intervention, which was related to contribution of civil society with data, was not only mentioned to international level, we are not invited to contribute in any way to national reports. And that's also one of the questions. In addition, there are dozens of reports produced by civil society. And I mentioned in the chat the collection of data which is being done by the European Harm Reduction Network Coalition, which is actually not being done only by civil society, but is produced by civil society with communication with all national data. And there are many things, and I wouldn't agree with your comment that the validity of this data is not correct. So please consider involving us in the process of collecting data. We can check them, but I'm quite sure that we are very good in providing solid data. Thank you.
Thank you. Milut, I agree with you. So I also believe that there is a lot of quality data in civil society organizations. We also collaborate a lot with academia, with universities, so that for sure, to some extent, civil society organizations can provide quality data. So I'm really sorry that I know that there are a lot of questions and comments, and I will be really glad to read the whole chat after this webinar. And if we see some very valuable questions or comments, we will definitely try to respond or ask UNODC to respond to some of them. And we are now coming to the end of this informative and very valuable webinar. So Mirela, do you have any final thoughts and closing remarks from your side?
Just to thank everybody for being here, to thank especially my colleague Thomas and Kamran for presenting, and the whole team. Of course, Chloe is not here, but we know that the World REC report, even if we can hear that it can always be improved, but believe me, it remains the worldwide flip chart on issues related to drugs, worldwide recognized, and I'm very proud to be in UNODC to have this excellent publication, which of course has to take care of the fact that the UN is a member states organization, and therefore the questionnaire goes primarily to member states, and we try to reflect and corroborate the information. I'm not the best statistician, but I hope I'm saying the things correctly, Thomas. But here it's just to say that yes, my role is to make sure that civil society is well informed, is kept informed about anything related to UNODC. And I'm again very pleased that we can host this yearly event specifically for you. I'm sure that many member states would have loved to have this opportunity, to go that deep and hear also these comments. But this is really a privilege that NGOs and civil society have here. And I saw, yes, many questions. I'm sure somewhere addressed more to Matej, and I'm sure he will respond to them in the chat or directly. But the time is over. So thank you all, and see you soon on another opportunity, another webinar, probably next time also in October, if I'm not wrong. There are thematic discussions. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Mirela, and also thank you from my side to Thomas, Kamran, and the whole team at the UNODC Drugs Research section, and also to Civil Society Unit to co-facilitate this valuable webinar. It is, of course, another tool for us to be engaged as a civil society organization with the UN, and we will do our best to make it sure that there will be more opportunities for civil society organizations to be engaged in this kind of discussions with all UN agencies, not just UNODC, but also with others. And thank you also to Ghana and Connor to participate as a civil society representatives. And I look forward for some other opportunities to meet you and be engaged in discussion. Thank you. And